Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Depot Dive, where we're going to dive into the three biggest Steelers-related topics of the week. And the Steelers coming off another primetime victory against another New York football team, this time the Giants. And the Steelers are advanced to 6-2 entering the bye week, so pretty exciting. I think this is kind of a lot of people. I don't know if I was fully on board with this statement, but a lot of people kind of said the Steelers needed to be something like 6-2 or 5-3 at the very worst to have a shot down the stretch of the season. I think probably they're not given enough credit for how they play in the division, and so I don't know how true that statement is. But for those of you that believe that is the truth, they are 6-2, and so I think there's a lot of happy Steelers fans. Joe, how are you feeling today after the big win?
Yeah, I mean, last night, definitely a little bit too close for comfort, but I really like the way the offense moved the ball. 6-2 heading into the bye is obviously never a bad thing. And, the way some of the division has played out earlier this season, I think the second half looks a little bit less daunting, still definitely more difficult than what we've seen so far. And it's still going to be a grind because it always is. I mean, as we saw the Browns knock off the Ravens this weekend. So, the AFC North is always going to be close, hard fought games. So, rest up this week, ready for the second half. But, very happy with what we've seen in the first half, more or less.
Yeah, this is an aside, but are you more scared of the Jameis Winston Browns than you would have been of the Deshaun Watson Browns?
Honestly, 100%. Yeah. I mean, Deshaun Watson was just, he didn't look like he wanted to be out there. And Jameis Winston has absolutely nothing to lose going out there. I mean, he played like Jameis. I mean, if Kyle Hamilton had that interception, it's a different story. But so the Steelers are gonna have to be opportunistic against him. But if they aren't, then he can kind of pick them apart a little bit. I mean, we saw some holes in their defense last night, so a little bit more concerned. I still think the Steelers should be able to take care of business, but a little worrisome now that Jameis is under center.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen Jameis be capable of kind of a 30 touchdown, 30 interception type of season before, and so you never know what you're going to get, kind of trick or treat or hot and cold, up and down, whatever adjectives you want to ascribe to him there. But that is, that's going to be very interesting when they play the Jameis Winston Browns, and that defense is still a good defense. They just weren't really operating on offense. So, yeah, who knows what's going to happen there. A lot more intrigue, at least for the AFC North Hard Knocks, which will be starting here and, before too long. I don't know exactly the start date of that, but it's
The last 6 weeks of the season, so it'll start, week 12 will be the first, I would assume the first week.
so
That it
roughly a month
airs.
from now. That'll be
Yeah.
kicking off. Yeah, that should be very, very interesting. I think what everyone thought was going to be a very competitive division now looks like a two-horse race. The Bengals dropped another game this week, and so it's the Browns and the Bengals are really going to have to fight to be in any kind of relevance. I think the Browns probably that boat's kind of gone. The Bengals have a very outside chance. Burrow was like, we got to win 7 of the next 9. That's doable, and it's like, all right, well. Given what your record is now, that doesn't look all that doable, but hey, I'm not going to write them off yet. So anyway, we're going to jump into our actual topics here for the week and just kind of recapping the Giants game. Steelers winning 26-18. The score probably could have been something like 46-18. Had just a couple of things gone slightly different. The Steelers, of course, had a couple of called back touchdowns. There was the face mask penalty on Broderick Jones that called back the first George Pickens touchdown. And then there was George Pickens failing to get his second foot down. He did get his 1 foot down twice, but he didn't get both feet down. And that is, of course, what constitutes a touchdown in the NFL. I know there was some confusion about that on Twitter and everything. And it did look like a catch. It was the most, as far as non-catches go, it really, really looks like a catch. I don't know if I've ever seen a non-catch look like a catch more. But, of course, it did not count. Replay assists overturned that. Mike Tomlin challenged it and wasted a timeout, which didn't end up being that big of a deal, but could have been. And, so a little bit of wonkiness there. But what I'm trying to get at is the Steelers probably looked a lot better than the 26-18 score indicated. Joe, what are some of the high-level takeaways that you have from this game, and where do you want to start?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I'll start with is what you touched on is just the red zone offense really struggled. I mean, the Steelers offense got going early. They moved the ball well. They just always stalled on the red zone. I mean, the penalty on Broderick, negated, found that knocked him back. They lost some momentum, but it's tough to see when they're stalling out the 5 yard line routinely in the first half. So that was frustrating. And I know that there's some reporting during the week that the Steelers had kind of planned to use Justin Fields this week, maybe in some of packages, and then he obviously tweaked his hamstring. So part of me wonders if those Justin Fields packages, we see them stall in the red zone last night. We saw what Justin Fields is able to do with his legs in those short red area situations. So now maybe there'll be more of a so we're more of a like a not a need, but more of an effort to kind of use Justin Fields in some of those situations if he gets healthy. It seems like the hamstring is minor. Defensively, the Steelers had a lot of leakage. I didn't like the way they defended the run. They allowed too many chunk plays through the air. But TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith were absolutely phenomenal. I mean, 17 pressures between the two of them. Chris Hubbard was literally on skates the entire night. I think Alex Highsmith kept beating him with the same move. He kept ducking underneath him to the right, and Chris Hubbard just, I don't know if he couldn't adjust or just refused to adjust. I mean, Highsmith has such an array of moves that even if he does adjust, he's probably going to beat him with something else. But it was just the same move over and over, beating him. I think you can make an argument it was the best game of Highsmith's career. But when the pass rush wasn't getting home, or even if it was, the Giants beat him with a quick game. Early on, there was a lot of dump offs, running back screens. Tyrone Tracy had a huge game. So that's stuff that, not a huge deal, but a little bit worrisome. And you want to get some of the defensive stuff cleaned up before the bye when you're heading into, you have the Commanders with Jaden Daniels, their passing offense first game out. If the Steelers play like they did last night, Daniels is going to have a big game, and then obviously to get into the division. And then just shout out Najee Harris. I mean, 3 straight 100-yard rushing games. I think that's the first time in his career he's done that. He's been an absolute tank these last few weeks, running angry. He's finding holes. He's getting some burst. I mean, he had averaged 10.2 yards per carry or something on his first 6-7 carries of the game. So he's been absolutely phenomenal. And I think what he's done for this offense has just really been the catalyst of what's taken it to another level. So I think if he could really keep going, then this is going to be a tough team to beat down the stretch.
Yeah, just to touch on what you said about Alex Highsmith and it being the best game of his career, 11 pressures just for Alex Highsmith. That is, I mean, that's more than most players get in 3 or 4 games combined. Highsmith had that in 1 game. It only resulted in 2 sacks, but I think he had 6 quarterback hits in the ESPN box score. It depends where you look because PFF has it slightly different and PFR and ESPN box score, but 6 quarterback hits from the ESPN box score. I mean, that's, I think, the James Harrison game back in 2007. Mike Tomlin specifically referenced that yesterday morning in his little question and answer thing with Bob Labriola on the Steelers website. He specifically referenced how etched it was into his memory that James Harrison had 6 quarterback hits in that game. And then, of course, Alex Highsmith just comes and does that casually and really doesn't get talked about a lot. And I mean, what? All the questions after the game is just, how great is TJ Watt? Poor Alex Highsmith can't get a question about his awesome performance, but that's a separate discussion there. But yeah, I think Alex Highsmith is clearly proving how much he was missed for those 3 or 4 games that he was out. I mean, especially once Nick Herbig went down, it was a disaster with trying to fill in with these guys off the practice squad and stuff. They just weren't able to get the sacks. The Steelers have kind of been lagging behind their typical sack total as a result, but they're starting to catch up. Watt and Highsmith each having 2 apiece yesterday, and I mean, TJ Watt is just, I mean, his impact hasn't been, in terms of the sack column, hasn't been as high this year, but I mean, he's already up to 4 forced fumbles. That already ties his 2023 total, and we're only 8 games into the season. And of course, he had 2 forced fumbles that were negated due to penalties in week 1 against the Falcons. And so you're talking about a guy who's just been taking over games. Even when he didn't have Highsmith across from him, he was still finding ways with teams chipping him at a crazy high rate, the highest rate in the league. He's still finding ways to impact the game. The pass rush is the engine of that defense, and the engine is finally, well-oiled and ready to go for the rest of the season. So I think the defense will only improve as we get further into the season. But yeah, as you said, there are some concerns. They got run, 100 and I don't know how many yards for Tracy there, 100 and I have it up here, 145. 145 on 20 carries. 7.3 average. That is not good, especially for a defense that basically had been, one of the best rushing defenses in the league. It does seem to be kind of a trend. It's like these offenses that shouldn't be running very well end up running well on the Steelers. I don't know what that's about necessarily. But to the Giants' credit, I think they actually did play a really good game on offense, other than obviously the absurd number of penalties that they commit. You can't ignore those, but I think taking that out and just kind of focusing on their actual play, they played very well on offense. Daniel Jones was getting the ball out quickly for the most part. He was being, fairly accurate. I think there was a couple calls that kind of probably were kind of screwed the Giants a little bit. I mean, there was that Joey Porter Jr. non-pass interference that probably should have been a PI, could have changed the complexion of the game a little bit. And so it's not all just the Steelers playing poorly. Sometimes the other guys play well, but it is a concern, especially when you're talking about, having to face Derrick Henry 2 more times and a couple of other good running backs remaining on their schedule. Are there any other topics we wanted to go over recapping the game here?
Just kind of Dante Jackson. I thought it was probably his worst game of the season. Darius Slayton beat him deep downfield a few times, and I think that's something the Steelers definitely have to, or not the Steelers, but Jackson kind of has to get cleaned up going forward, because the performance from the secondary wasn't like anything special. Joey Porter Jr. a few catches from Malik Neighbors. Neighbors didn't really take over the game the way he's done at times of the season, but heading into the second half of the schedule, I want to see Porter and both Jackson kind of get to the level they played at earlier this season, and not allow, these big chunk plays downfield, because it's just going to hurt the Steelers defense in totality if they're playing, backed up against the red zone the whole game.
Yeah, and hopefully we see Corey Trice Jr. back in the fold before too long. We haven't heard anything on that front for a little bit, but he is eligible now to be returned from IR, and so he had a hamstring. You'd figure this is kind of roughly the time, unless it was kind of a season-ending thing, which we didn't really get that indication from any reports, that this is roughly the time you'd kind of expect him to start returning, especially with the bye week. So maybe we do see Trice, his practice window opened up, maybe next week sometime ahead of the Steelers, it would be week 10 game against the Washington Commanders. So getting him back in the mix, he was playing pretty well before he got injured. So that could be an interesting thing to kind of alleviate the burden on somebody like Jackson, who is clearly dealing with a shoulder injury. He's on and off all season, and maybe that's starting to catch up with him a bit. And so the bye week might help that a little bit as well. So there's some optimism there. Beanie Bishop Jr. getting his 3rd pick in 2 weeks. That can't be overlooked. I mean, that is very, very impressive, very needed for him, and perfect timing. 3 picks in 2 weeks, right before Cam Sutton comes off the suspension list and rejoins and, presumably takes his spot as the starting slot corner. But now it's a little more interesting, I think. I still think they're excited about Sutton, and I'm still excited about Sutton. But Bishop will probably at least, he earned himself at least a handful more snaps than he would have had otherwise. So good on him for that one. We'll move on to the second topic here. Roman Wilson, Steelers' 3rd round, their first of their 2 third-round draft picks, wide receiver out of Michigan. A lot of hope for him, especially early on in the process. I think he was leading the team in receiving yards through the unpadded practices at the very beginning of training camp. He looked pretty good, and once the pads came on, he got that high ankle sprain, ended up basically not able to practice until very recently. He came back, he tweaked his hamstring. He did play in 1 game, but he only got 5 snaps, no catches or anything like that, and tweaked his hamstring, and now he's on IR. I mean, it's essentially probably a wash season for him. It's a redshirt year. So, Joe, your thoughts on that, and I guess just the wide receiver room in general?
Yeah, so outside of, the fact that Wilson did suit up and play in 1 game, the similarities between this and Calvin Austin's situation his rookie season are so similar. I mean, Austin burst onto the scene early in camp and OTAs and minicamp, and everybody's like, oh, this guy's really good too. It's not just George Pickens. They have another receiver, and he was getting a ton of buzz. Roman Wilson early on getting a ton of buzz. Both get hurt. Seems like they're coming back. The Steelers activated Austin's practice window back when it was his rookie season, but then he never actually came off. So his season ended now with Wilson. Seemed like he was coming back from the ankle. Now he gets the hamstring back on IR. So I would anticipate probably that it's just a redshirt year for him and, get back at it next year. I mean, we saw last night Calvin Austin making an impact now. So definitely not, writing off Roman Wilson as a bad pick. Disappointing he can't contribute this season, but the fact that Austin has, kind of taken that step up in the slot has kind of necessitated the need, even if Roman Wilson was healthy, for him to play. So I think just, write this year off, get healthy, get right, come back next year stronger than ever and see what he can be. And just the room in general. I mean, last night was the best all around performance they've had. Van Jefferson had 4 catches for 62 yards. He had the 1 catch downfield. Pickens had 4 for 74, and obviously the 2 touchdowns. Wiped off the board. I do think he probably could have gotten his other foot in, but it was tough with the hit from Deontay Banks. And I mean, I'm in no position to tell him he should have gotten his foot in because I sure shit would have caught the ball or gotten my foot in. And then Calvin Austin, the punt return, and then 3 for 54 and the touchdown. So all around, right ahead of the deadline, these guys want to prove that they should be able to keep their role going for the rest of the season, and Steelers don't need to bring in any help. Last night was the game to prove it, and they more or less did. And you look at the receivers that are available right now. There's really nobody to get super excited about. I know Tony Pauline, he was the first one to report last year that Deontay Johnson is on the market. He said there's a 50-50 chance the Broncos trade Cortland Sutton. At least, from just how the way I see it, the Broncos are 5-3. Sutton's had 9 targets in 4 more games. If they really want to develop Bo Nix, then trading Sutton doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And I think if they do, they're gonna want to get something like a 2nd-round pick. And I don't know if the Steelers are gonna be willing to go that high for him. So I know, what was it, the when the Steelers on the Ayuk discussions, the Niners offered a 3rd for Sutton and the Broncos said no. And now Sutton's coming off a strong performance, and the Broncos are somehow in contention right now. So I don't really see that trade happening. Darius Slayton, obviously he played well last night. He's a name that's been floated, but there's really been no hard, hey, the Giants are really looking to deal this guy. So, I mean, outside of those two, you're looking at, Pauline floated Joshua Palmer. I don't know if Joshua Palmer is that much of an upgrade over what you have right now. There's really no names. I mean, I guess John Mechie was a candidate before the season, but the options are really dwindling for the Steelers, especially after Christian Kirk got hurt. And I mean, what we saw from the room last night, I think you can be fairly comfortable. I mean, like, buying a receiver isn't a cure-all. It's not going to lead to, make your team a lot better. Look at the Jets with Devontae Adams. I don't think the Steelers are going to, give up a second. I don't think they'd even give up a 3rd, a day 2 pick. So I guess I'm curious to see what they do, because I wouldn't be surprised if they do add. I mean, they're obviously in the market, and getting somebody would obviously be a huge help. I mean, Kendrick Bourne's a guy that really intrigues me from the Patriots, but what are they going to want for him? So it's kind of just a matter of weighing what you have versus the value you're willing to give up. So I think, maybe a smaller addition, maybe a name that doesn't jump off the page or really excites a lot of people, but can come in and fill a role, play a few snaps a game, maybe a 2 or 3 reception a game sort of guy, might be more viable at this point. I mean, we're a week away from the deadline, and it just doesn't seem as if there's anything, really imminent. So I was happy with what I saw from the room last night. I mean, Jefferson seemed to be building, rapport with Russell Wilson in their 2 games together. The touchdown against the Jets, and Calvin Austin. I mean, the guy has been open so many times this season, just not gotten the ball. And last night he got the ball and he made the most of it. So I'm kind of excited, honestly, to see if this room can develop as is. But at the same time, I would like the idea of just adding somebody else just in case, because, one of these guys goes down, you're really, really thin. You're relying, maybe you sign Brandon Johnson. You're relying heavily on some real unproven talent there. So I would like, maybe an insurance policy ad, but I don't think the Steelers are going to really go out and make a big splash. Although, like, if they did get Slayton, hey, I'd be thrilled. I'd be all for it. I'm not saying not to do it, but I like what they have right now to a degree where I'm comfortable if the room stays healthy for the rest of the year, that the Steelers have proven they can win games with, the Pickens, Jefferson, Austin trio. And then obviously Freiermuth is a huge piece of tight end.
Yeah, I think Calvin Austin III was asked about, actually a couple of players were asked about, does this performance prove that, maybe the need for a receiver or outside help isn't as pressing as people thought it was. And, none of them are going to give like a crazy answer to that. But Calvin Austin III basically said, yeah, I guess you could call it sending a message from the outside, if you're viewing it from the outside. He said that the room, they've always had belief in themselves. I think if you're Omar Khan and you've been trying to add a receiver this whole time, Ayuk, Adams, whoever else, Cooper Kupp, I guess. If you've been trying to add a receiver this whole time, the urgency level in your mind has gone down quite a bit. And so if you're looking to be aggressive and maybe you were starting to think, well, gosh, like, is this team good enough to invest a second round draft pick to go and get a receiver? And would that push us over the top? Because, hey, we're 6-2 right now, or I guess before they were 5-2. And, things, I think generally most people are starting to buy into the fact that the Steelers are contenders of some degree. Are they favorites? No. But is it within the realm of possibility for them to make a run in the playoffs? I would say yes. So if you're Omar Khan and you see Russell Wilson start to elevate this wide receiver room, I have some stats here. It's going to be difficult to go through each of these, but the gist of it is there were only 2 players averaging 30 yards or more receiving yards with Justin Fields through the first 6 weeks. That was Pat Freiermuth with 32.3 receiving yards per game and George Pickens with 60.5 receiving yards per game. With Russell Wilson, there are 5 players that are above 30 receiving yards per game. That is Pickens, Calvin Austin III, Van Jefferson, Pat Freiermuth, and Darnell Washington, of all people. The guy who most people wrote off as basically just a extra tackle or a blocking tight end. He is now turning into a legitimate threat on this offense. I mean, every time he catches the ball, I'm wondering if he's going to run over 6 guys and go all the way to the end zone. And he was very close to having a house call like that in this game. He just barely, I think, stepped out of bounds there. So 5 players at 30 or more receiving yards per game, and you would think that would maybe come at the expense of those guys who are maybe being featured more, Pat Freiermuth and George Pickens, but their receiving yards per game have gone up along with everybody else. So it's kind of a rising tides floats all boats kind of situation. Everybody is benefiting from this. Pat Freiermuth seeing a little less targets, but otherwise everybody is seeing an increase in targets and yards. Freiermuth just yards. In touchdowns, they've gotten Van Jefferson a touchdown. They've gotten Calvin Austin III a touchdown. They got George Pickens his first touchdown, all with Russell Wilson. And so, yeah, this passing game is now looks viable, and they're more or less putting forth wide receiver 2 kind of production, or at least combining for some semblance of wide receiver 2 and 3 production on top of what they have with the tight ends. And so it is seeming way less urgent now to go out and get somebody. And I think you touched on some of the the trade candidates. Courtland Sutton, is obviously very interesting, but I would just be shocked. Why would the Broncos do that to Bo Nix? And they've talked about him so glowingly as a leader. They restructured his contract so it'd be a little more difficult and a little more costly for them to move on from him now. It's just every sign points to that not being a thing. So, I don't know if Pauline talked to somebody or what the deal is there, but I don't buy that one bit at all. Obviously, it would be great, Russell Wilson, reuniting with with Sutton, and they had a great relationship, I think, with the Broncos. We've heard that from both of them before, so all that's good. Darius Slayton's, I guess, somewhat interesting. The Steelers have a history of kind of looking at some players who have torched them, and Slayton certainly gave them fits yesterday. I don't know, what was his final box score?
4 for 108.
4 for 108, and I think he had a couple of near, he had at least one more near play on a long bomb that would have made that, even better. And so he outproduced even Malik Neighbors in this game, and he only had 7 targets, 4 receptions, 108, 27 average per reception. So that's an interesting name. The Giants certainly are a team that will probably be looking to sell. I think you mentioned Kendrick Bourne. I think the Patriots have been mentioned as a team that are looking to sell. Basically, nobody's off the table. Obviously, like somebody like Drake May is probably not on the table, but more or less nobody's off the table for the Patriots. They're in rebuild mode, and for the right price, I guess something could happen there. But it's at this point, I am leaning heavily towards a trade not happening, and if one happens, it's just going to end up being for Mike Williams, and I'm going to be kind of a little bit salty about it, just because I don't know what he really does for this offense other than just give him a big body, which I don't see what he kind of gives them right now. But that's where I'm at on the trade talk. Joe, is there anything else that popped up in your head while I was talking through all that?
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement with you. Mike Williams would be probably the most boring option at this point, and just a guy. He's really just a guy at this point in his career.
Which is a shame because I think he was pretty exciting a couple years ago. That injury took some out of him and whatever else. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the Steelers have had a penchant for reclaiming some of these guys. I mean, look, Russell Wilson, people said he was washed up, and now Mark Schlereth today, his biggest critics, had finally admitted I was wrong and called him one of the best deep ball throwers ever. So instead, he didn't just say he was wrong. He went above and beyond and is now praising him. I think he's now a big fan of Russell Wilson. So the Steelers are decent at these reclamation projects, so maybe they can get something out of Williams. But where I sit here now, not super exciting option to me. We're going to move on to the final topic here real quick, just talking about special teams. And they have indeed been very special for the Steelers. 3 blocked, field goals and punts over the previous 3 weeks. And then this week they had the big punt return touchdown by Calvin Austin III, sparked the team. That was their first touchdown of the day, if I'm not mistaken. And so, when the defense can't create the spark, or when the offense can't create the spark, you can kind of almost somewhat rely on the special teams unit to create a spark now, which is, I don't know if there's any other teams in the league that can say that with the kind of consistency the Steelers have. Joe, I think Calvin Austin III, he was the first, Alex tweeted out a great stat earlier. Let's see if I can pull it up. But Calvin Austin III joined a pretty exclusive list of Steelers to have a 70-plus yard punt return and receiving touchdown in their career. That's Deontay Johnson, Roy Jefferson, Louis Lips, Antonio Brown, and Ray Matthews. So you add Calvin Austin III to that list, and I think we all saw Antonio Brown kind of made his name as a punt returner earlier on. Calvin Austin III, it's just been a matter of time since he's broken one, and finally he gets it. Joe, reactions?
Yeah, I mean, Austin said last night he was upset with himself last season that he wasn't as much of a factor as a returner. And I mean, heading into last night, there's a few times this year where he's either had a nice return or you felt like he was going to break one and he just got brought down. So he said they put in a play during the week, a good left return play. They executed to perfection last night. I mean, it was one of those weird plays too where I think a lot of people probably weren't all that exciting watching it because you saw an early flag and then you saw the contact with the punter, and I just assumed we were going to get offsetting penalties there. It was like, oh, like Greg has this sick return and just going to get we're just going to have a re-kick. So like watching the play, I'm just like, yeah, whatever. Like, hey, really cool play, but it's coming back. And sure enough, the flag was just for illegal formation. And then that's when it came time to, celebrate a little bit. But just the way special teams has played for the Steelers, I mean, haven't seen a stretch like this. I don't know if I've ever seen a stretch like this. I haven't from the Steelers. I don't know if I've seen one anywhere where just consistently week after week, somebody's coming through with a big, game-changing type play. The Steelers couldn't take advantage of it against the Cowboys after the blocked field goal, but the last 3 weeks they scored off the block punt. They had the block kick last week and went on to do some damage after that. And then the punt return last night really was the spark. Mike Tomlin said it was the catalyst for the Steelers to get going. It was the first score for either team in the game. And then after, Austin scored that, the offense got moving a little bit. They had a touchdown drive. Russell Wilson was like 9 of 10 in the second half. So it kind of re-energized, and especially in a home game, that really, sparks the crowd. It's a huge play. It's an exciting play, not one you see very often. I mean, it was the Steelers' first one since 2019 when Deontay did it against the Cardinals, or 28. I think it was 2019. I was a sophomore in college. Anyway, but yeah, so first time in 5 years that the Steelers have had a punt return touchdown. So pretty sweet. I mean, gotta love Danny Smith. The cuts to him on the sideline every week of him getting pumped up, chomping on a whole pack of bubble gum are never gonna get old. And I think Pat Farmer said today he still can't even, on Pat McAfee, he still can't even really move his arm that he hurt last year after that little scrap with the Packers, and he's always in the rehab room getting after it with the guys. And it's clear they love him, and he's put in, this is a career coaching job. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets, some end of year recognition from the PFWA for, Lifetime Assistant Coach Achievement Award for especially just how well he's done this season. So excited for him. Really excited to see how this special teams unit keeps growing. I mean, it's just been a lot of fun to watch. Great play designs. They have a ton of dudes, and I mean, they get Matakevich back pretty soon. I know Mike Tomlin said last week he was in consideration. They activated him, or they opened up his practice window to return. And so I assume we'll see him back against the Commanders, and that'll be a fun one to watch for sure.
Yeah, and consider this, the Steelers entering the year, who do we think were going to be the biggest special teams contributors? Obviously, Miles Killebrew, who has been there. I don't really think he's created any of the splash so far. Has he blocked anything? I don't think he has.
No, he hasn't.
So it hasn't
He
come
came
from
close
him.
once.
He did come close. You thought Tyler Matakevich would be in that conversation, but he's been on IR, and so he's been out. Cordell Patterson was a huge, I mean, he was the biggest one everybody was talking about with the new rules and stuff. Obviously, the kick return rules haven't ended up being all they were cracked up to be, but he was another one that you kind of thought would be providing a spark on special teams. He's getting back into the mix here, and maybe teams will start to kick for returns more. It'll be interesting to see as the playoff field gets narrow. I think Mike Tomlin kind of predicted that teams will not want to just spot teams on the 30-yard line routinely. We'll see if that ends up coming true or not. So we'll see. Maybe Patterson will have an impact there. Who else? There was Jaylen Warren was kind of in that mix. He was out for a few games. So a lot of and Cameron Johnston, the punter. This is a guy who we thought was going to take the punting game to new heights, and it looked as advertised until he got injured. And Corliss Waitman stepped in and basically picked up where Johnston left off, and that's just been phenomenal for the Steelers. And so, yeah, they're getting all the special teams contributions from unlikely places, and I think there's probably contributions to come from the likely places, which means this special teams unit's going to end up looking just amazing by the end of the year. And they're now in a position where all three phases of the game are capable of creating that spark. The defense absolutely is capable. Special teams, they have proven it time and time again. And now the offense with Russell Wilson, more than capable of creating a spark with a big play. Maybe a 70-yard touchdown pass. We haven't seen one of those that actually gets, I guess, completed for the touchdown yet. Calvin Austin's was deep enough, but 29 yards last night. So I think there's splash to come from the offense, but the spark can now come from all three units, which is just a huge benefit to have. Literally any time of the game, no matter what unit's on the field, something good can happen that sparks the Steelers to kind of turn around the tide of the game. And that can't be overlooked at all. Joe, is there anything else that you have for us here before we sign off?
No, just looking forward to the bye week. It's a week we get to hear from all the position coaches and all the assistant coaches. So should be a fun time just to hear what they have to say after this pretty impressive start.
Absolutely. And the trade deadline will be after next weekend's game. So on Tuesday, a week from today, we will be talking about the trade deadline, whether or not they traded for one of these receivers. Maybe there's a position kind of low key that they trade for. I mean, Dan Moore Jr., that was a scare last night. Boy, if he would have gotten hurt, that would have been just a disaster for this offensive line. Fortunately, he was able to return to the game. But yeah, we will see what happens with the trade deadline and more to talk about next week. I am Ross McCorkle. That is Joe Clark. Make sure to call the number at the bottom of the screen, 412-254-3145. Leave us a question. We don't have any this week for you guys, but text, call. That means your question will be first in line if you give us a call and leave us a voicemail. Again, that's 412-254-3145. Thank you guys for joining, and we will catch you next week.